All right, in this video, I just want to cover the Jam launch vision for 2024. I want to talk about the goals of the platform, what's coming up this year, what I'm hoping to accomplish this year and in the long term in general with the platform. I also want to talk about what I did in the past month and what's coming up in the next few months. So, the Jam launch vision is for it to be a sustainable, high quality cloud platform for deploying and playing Godot multiplayer games. When I say sustainable, what I mean is I want it to be able to provide a good value, right? So it would be a product that you'd want to use more than once. Uh, and it's a product, I want it to be a product that I would be able to use indefinitely because I like to make Godot games and deploy them and share them with my friends. And I like to have an easy platform to do that. I also want to be able to pay the AWS bills that um, that will come from deploying multiplayer authoritative game servers in the cloud. So the whole idea of Jam Launch is structured around that sort of simple thing of being good, usable, and able to pay the bills. And I want to avoid like garbagey business models, like arbitrary platform taxes. So I guess sort of like an app store kind of thing or Steam, where it's you take a giant chunk of everything that's going through it. I don't really. I mean, I can see why investors like that because you get a bunch of money for doing not too much. But uh, I don't. I don't see why you can't just have a product that's charging you AWS fees plus a little bit on top of that in order to give you, a cool cloud solution for multiplayer game stuff. So the goal is to have this valuable thing that will be, I can keep coming back to it and it will keep making sense the amount of money it costs for me. And I would want that to be the same for other people. I want it to be a reasonable, sensible thing that hobbyists and indie developers would be able to come back to and keep using um, for a long time. Um, I also want it to be high quality. It'd be great if it could just be a default solution for Godot multiplayer, sort of an obvious choice. I want to make sure there's a lot of thought invested in the mechanisms of it so that it maintains a lot of flexibility, right? Because I know everyone's kind of doing something a little bit different, but also that it's able to sort of streamline some of the default behaviors of how you might do a multiplayer game server architecture or how you might do user authentication or things like that, right? Sort of streamline some of these things that you know you kind of have to do, but most people don't want to spend a bunch of time caring about. So I want it to kind of fill in a lot of that stuff and be sort of, if you're making a multiplayer game in Godot, I'd love for Jam Launch to just kind of be the thing that's like, oh yeah, like, well, it's like if you don't need anything crazy, right? Jam Launch would be a great way to do this because, um, it's reasonably priced, sustainable, and, it does the things you need it to do, right? And hopefully it will gain a record of, being reliable enough that it would be trusted to be a default solution. So that's a goal. This is the vision. I don't know that it's there yet, but this is the vision, right? And so I want it to be easy enough to use for personal projects, right? So Godot is great because it's so approachable. It's so easy to get in there and just like make your crazy project. I can't. I don't even know how many times I've just had a terrible fun idea and been able, thanks to Godot, to be able to just like whip it together, right? And so I want this to be like that too, right? I want it to integrate tightly with the Godot workflow, with the editor plugin, and I want it so that that's able to enable, fun personal projects. Uh, I also want it to be reliable enough to support commercial projects. I know um, some people that I'm talking to right now about using it, right? They have business use cases, right, where they need to make money, right, and they need a platform that's reliable enough to for them to be able to then host their things on it and then be able to sell things to their customers. And so I want it to be reliable enough that it would be usable in a commercial use case as well. even though I'm coming from a background of using Godot for personal projects. And then so roughly the goal for 2024 is to improve the stability, scalability, and quality of the product. It's pretty cool right now. It works pretty well. It's every now and then there's something weird that comes up, or an edge case that hasn't been covered by the projects that have been tested so far. I don't really know how scalable it is right now. I think maybe it's probably just limited by the AWS quota, and so I mean there's going to be a little bit of you know uh, experimenting to sort of get that to make sure it's meeting the needs of the people that are using it. So I mean, hopefully throughout 2024, it's going to be getting more predictable in how stable it is, how much it's able to scale, and how much quality it's providing, right? How much value add is it giving to the project that you're working on? Um, and how hard is it to integrate, or how easy is it to integrate in your existing Godot project? So hopefully they'll just sort of be nice generic strides in improving the product, right? I want to coordinate with customers, right? So already, I've got some really interesting use cases coming from people who are trying to do standard gaming things, sometimes not so standard, but like really interesting stuff. And I think the way that Jam Launch was designed and the way it works is going to actually enable some things that maybe were not so obvious. So yeah, I'm really looking forward to seeing the kinds of things people are trying to do with Godot multiplayer projects, whether it's a game or maybe some enterprise coordination product. And so I think that's going to be really cool. And I'm also going to be doing that with the goal of improving, the platform for everyone, right? I know, I think some customers, they might have to go off and do a little bit on their own on the side too. But I want to see how much Jam Launch is able to cover, right? So that so again, it can be just a great default solution for when you have a Godot multiplayer idea. Jam Launch will be able to sort of fit the mold of that without you having to do too much work. And sort of I want to improve the add-on to include more Godot multiplayer idioms that would be useful regardless of whether or not you're using Jam Launch. So with the multiplayer stuff in Godot, right, they have a lot of great, high level, low level multiplayer APIs. Sometimes it's not so intuitive how to use them, right? If you're coming from just making single player games, the multiplayer stuff isn't always easy to grasp. There's a lot of ways to do it. There's a lot of bad ways to do it, and so it's like finding the right balance and finding the right way to do a multiplayer game if you want it to scale up to 40 people cleanly or something, right? There's a lot of little tricks that you kind of pick up if you've been making multiplayer games, right? And within the Godot platform, right, I want to sort of have the add-on include a lot of these little idioms for managing state buffers, or making sure the network traffic doesn't get like overflown with a lot of redundant data, right? Trying to make it so that it's easy to synchronize things across clients without overloading the network or overloading the server with too much network traffic. Um, and so yeah, I want to just improve like so the add-on, right, which is open source on GitHub. I want that to just have more multiplayer idioms because if you can make multiplayer games more easily in Godot, maybe you'll use Jam Launch to deploy them. So I want that to just have lots of great high quality multiplayer idioms that anyone could use regardless of whether or not they're using Jam Launch, and also because since Jam Launch doesn't really Jam Launch isn't like a very opinionated server platform, right? So Jam Launch lets you sort of run a normal Godot authoritative server in the cloud. It's not some special Jam Launch server that you need to then have a Godot client API that interacts with. It just sort of like works with your normal Godot project. Um, so also that's why these idioms would be able to be useful in both the Jam launch and generic Godot multiplayer context. Another thing I want to do, I mean, so I'm interested in authoritative server multiplayer, right? I think that's kind of a cool way to go, right? Because you don't have to worry about NAT issues with the clients, or you don't have to worry about um, cheating as much, right? So you don't have to worry about the complexities of programming, like peers sharing authority over the game state, right? It's a little bit more clear cut, right? Like multiplayer is hard enough, to get right. When you have the authoritative server, it gets a little bit weirder if you're trying to balance it across a player to player context, like in deciding who's actually in charge of the game state. Um, but oh yeah, I mean, so there's benefits to multiplayer, authoritative multiplayer stuff, and that's what I'm interested in doing right now. So that's what Jam Launch currently supports. But I think over the course of 2024, I'll probably be exploring peer-to-peer options as well, um, because that's just cheaper to do, right? So if Jam Launch is just providing like signaling and maybe like selective forwarding of peer-to-peer traffic when it's not able to establish peer-to-peer connection directly, having some like failovers. It might be possible to provide a much cheaper option for hobbyists that maybe don't care about competitive authoritative multiplayer servers. So yeah, I'm going to try to explore peer-to-peer options for that. There's also another thing to explore where, so maybe you still care about um, having an authoritative multiplayer server, but you don't care if it's like highly responsive and useful for like a platformer or action game, right? So right now it's like you have the server up all the time, running, processing and sending state information, uh, and so it's constantly using the provision server and network traffic. It would be cheaper if in certain types of games to just sort of spin up um, the server logic on demand, right? So sort of the serverless architecture idea, and so the it might be worth exploring sort of a low traffic, high latency server where you could have a provision server that could manage multiple games like 10 or 20 or 100, right? If it's instead of sending data every frame of the game, right? So like 60 times a second or something, you could just have it sending data every few seconds from the client, right? So in a card game or a board game, if the only traffic to the server and the only processing that needs to happen about the state is happening in sort of these very isolated, you know, low rate situations, right? You're able to get more economy out of that. So yeah, so I think I'll try to explore something like that too, right? Because I know not everyone wants to pay for authoritative multiplayer, right? And um, so yeah, I might explore those things too as a way of sort of increasing the amount of uh, multiplayer options you'd have for your game if you were using Jamlaunch. And yeah, I want to help people make more great multiplayer experiences, right? I have a lot of fun playing multiplayer games. I think there's something fun about just playing games with the right group of people, regardless of the game, right? So I think it's great when there's more great multiplayer games. I look forward to playing games that randos make on Jamlaunch. It's going to be great. All right, so with that sort of like high level roadmap vision stuff out of the way, I'll sort of go into a little bit of the work that was done in the past month. So one of the things I was gonna try to do is get a bigger example project out, but I realized that I wanted to have the web client and a different way of managing the authentication of the users before I did that, because I realized so with so if you have a game that's running in Godot and you're running it in a native client, it's not sandboxed at all, really, right? So there's an issue in I think the Godot engine GitHub where they're going to try to work on sandboxing, like having a sandboxed environment for running Godot so that it won't just have arbitrary access to, the things in your file system or whatever. Um, and so, yeah, like if you're playing games, that are public, like, if you're running an executable on your computer, right, you need to trust the person that's coming from, right? Um, and there's a little bit less trust required when you're running something in a browser because that's like a sandboxed environment where there's not just arbitrary access to the file system and stuff like that. So, so I wanted to get the web client export because if I was going to publish this example demo, I'd want people to be able to, comfortably execute it in their browser rather than worry about, oh shoot, is this person shady and just wants to execute things on my computer, right? And so maybe I'm a little bit paranoid about all this. I guess you can always just like run the stuff in a VM or something, but yeah, that was something that came to mind of like, okay, if I'm going to share a project with people, I want to have a web client export, right? So instead of working on that example, I worked at trying to make the web client export work. I Part of doing that also was getting it so that the authentication worked a little bit differently. So in the earlier version of Jam Launch, I had something so that just like you log into a Jam Launch account, right? So if we're up here and we sign out, just how you would log in here, right, with username and password. I had that as part of the extension in the game, right? So if you like started a game and you weren't logged in, it would like ask you for your username and password. And that was kind of also weird because it would mean that the in the client um, you would have access to, like, if someone published a game and you put your username and password in their game, technically they have control over that if they want to then do something with it, right? If they want to send that off to some other server, right? So again, maybe I'm being crazy paranoid here, but um, it's like in general, there are ways of designing this stuff so that there aren't so many like security perils, right? And so I thought a little bit about that and how, if how we could have authentication for a game in a way where the person running the game right on the server, they still need to verify that you're allowed to access this game, and Jam Launch still needs to verify that you can access this game. But how do you make it so that the things that you're providing uh, in order to validate who or verify who you are, how do you make it so that they aren't um, you're not then letting that person who owns that game impersonate you in a different game that maybe they didn't publish, right? So how do you make it so they can't just log into your Jam Launch account and like ruin things, right? So so what I did was I made it so that the game authentication part, right? So what happens when you have your game client running here is you have something called a game JOT or JWT, so JSON Web Token. So basically, when you're running the game, instead of having sort of like the standard token that you use to authenticate with Jam Launch in the browser, for example, right? So here, instead of having that token, you have a special token that's signed by a key in Jam Launch that only provides access to that specific game. So it's a game scoped JWT JOT token, right? So I abbreviate it GJWT, and so So we have these GJWTs or GJOT or GJOT. I don't know, GJOT. How about GJOT? So we have these GJOTs, and uh, this way, if you play a game in the browser by someone who was trying to be shady and take your authentication, right? They would only be able to take the authentication for their game, right? So they're only able to ruin their own game, right? They're not able to ruin like other games that you might play, right? Or other games that other people have ownership over. Um, and I guess I won't really get into the details of how that's accomplished, but that's sort of like that was sort of how I reworked that, and that also led to a couple other useful knock-on effects of because these gajots are able to be generated um, by me a little bit more dynamically than the other authentication stuff. And they're verifiable by third parties, right? So there's a couple. Actually, yeah, there's more than one cool effect of this. So basically, what it means is, uh, so when you have your game client, um, when you download the game includes that so that you don't need to, when you're in the game, actually log into it, right? So when you download the game or when you play the game in the browser, the Gajot is just embedded in the game because you requested it from a secure context, right? So you requested it from your logged in JamLaunch account, and so that tells JamLaunch, okay, this person is verified; they're allowed to get this Gajot for this game because they have access to this game. And so it generates the Gajot with the scoped access to just this game as this user. And then it generates that for the game. So then when you download the game, it's like when you run the game, you don't have to like log into the game or something, right? It just already knows because you downloaded it in a secure context. You're able to then use it and authenticate from the game without as yourself, right, in that game context. And so the so yeah, so there's that cool effect. There's also the effect of, since it's sort of using like the OpenID Connect standard stuff. You'd actually also be able to verify it in a third party application, right? So say you make a game and it has some mechanism in a backend that you want to control, right? You don't want it to be on JamLaunch, um, and you want users to be able to hit that from their client. You can actually send that the Gajot from the client to your servers, and then in your servers you can verify that this request is coming from that client by hitting the JamLaunch OpenID server and checking against the public keys there to make sure the signature on the token is valid. So yeah, basically this auth three factor opened up a lot of cool things. It also made it so that the Jam Launch extension, which was in the previous add-on, is no longer needed. The extension is only used now in the server in order to do the accesses for the DynamoDB and Amazon S3. So yeah, we did that, and then got the web client working. Just by using the Godot web export at that point, I didn't have to figure out how to get the extension to work in the web because now it doesn't. The add-on is just pure Godot. So I got the web client working. Now it's much easier and more secure to execute programs, execute the games in the browser from a limited trust standpoint, right? I mean, I guess it's like you don't trust somebody at all, right? Like don't follow any links they send you. Don't run any of the executables they give you. But like this way, there's sort of a limited trust, kind of more reasonable situation for if someone does um, a game jam game and they share it and you were in that game jam, you feel a little more comfortable running the game than if you had to download an executable. So yeah, we got web client exports working. And then also, thanks to some customers in Western Europe, there is now a Western Europe deployment region. In adding the Western Europe region, that also made some of the architecture in the backend a lot more flexible, so that adding new regions is going to be a lot easier, right? So that was figured out. There was a little bit of it wasn't quite as straightforward as just like spinning up another cluster, but now that it's been done, it will be pretty much as straightforward as spinning up another cluster. So that's great. And then recently, I also, again, thanks to some enterprising early adopters having some issues with the build logs, or the build wasn't working for the deployment, right? So if we go, so here we're in the Jam Launch editor plugin, right? And so I added it so that you can now check the logs of the builds. And so when you build these things in AWS, there are some logs generated. And if there was an error in the Godot export, this lets you now see, what the errors were, right? So if you messed up something, or if Jam Launch is messing something up, right, this now provides a more clear, message that you're able to look at and see if it's your problem or potentially Jam Launch's problem, and then act from there. Also, I don't know if you, so the Godot CLI export spits out a lot of errors from like importing things pretty much the first time. If you're like, if the cache isn't there from the editor. So to help that out with the build export, it runs the export twice. So the second time we'll usually have a slightly cleaner looking, log. So, so yeah, so now we have these logs that, if you build something and there's an error, and you don't want to have me forward the logs to you, now you can just access them directly for your projects. And then also you can, if you have sessions, right? So if you have multiplayer sessions, so there's no active sessions of this project right now. If I start a session, there will be an active session. So let's start a session really quick. Whoops, I joined as the same person. Yeah, so you have to join with a different test client. Let's see here. All right, so if we have this game, all right, so we can see. So now we have this game running. And so now we should have an active session if we refresh this list. Yeah, we can see here. We got this game. It's got app test 1 and app test 2. We can see when it was created. We can see other relevant information, and we can look at the logs, right? So we can see, okay, if you have messages that are printing out, you'll be able to see, okay, so we got, up here, we were able to verify that they were who they said they were, and so then they got to join the game as app test 1 and then app test 2. And then if we finish that game up, so I guess, yeah, we can just force quit those games. I wonder if doing it like that maybe made it quit kind of inelegantly. We'll see. Okay, so now it's deprovisioning because all the servers or all the peers disconnected. So all peers disconnected, shutting down. We can see it's deprovisioning. And now there's no more active sessions, but if we go to ended, we can see that we have some ended sessions from the 21st. This one was earlier, and this one was that one that just ended. So, and we can get the logs for them, right? So let's look at the logs for the one from earlier. Okay, we can see here we had, stuff there. So yeah, that was a new feature. That's great. And then, yeah, so I think that was the last new feature to cover. Yeah, and then so in the short term, I think like the biggest thing is I got to get more text documentation and tutorials. I started working on API documentation. So if you search help, should work. Oh shoot, this was working earlier. Did I do something wrong? Hmm. Hmm. Yeah, so normally it'll show up there. Wonder if something weird happened. What happens if I reload this? Oh, well, didn't like that. Hmm. This is embarrassing. Oh, I think there was something. Do I have to change the order of this? Oh, weird. Okay, yeah. So it's the order of that. I should fix that. Um, yeah. So we have this GD script documentation here, um, and yeah. So I've been trying to fill out more of these core add-on script classes. So the Jam Connect node, the Jam Server node, and the Jam Client node. I've been adding the GD script comments, documentation comments. I'm trying to get all the public methods and members documented. Even though some of them, I mean, some of them might be placeholders or they might be changing, but I figured I would just get it all sort of explained so that, if you like reading the documentation or if something's confusing, you'll kind of get an idea of, what I was thinking when I wrote this part or that part or whatever. And there's more to come, right? So there's other classes that would be useful to have more documentation, right? So some of the UI stuff, any of the utility stuff, any of the things that I expand to sort of, if I start adding more just idiomatic multiplayer classes, right, that might help bootstrap certain types of multiplayer techniques. I'll try to add documentation to all that. But yeah, so I started doing that. I'll try to expand the API documentation. And then uh, there's also, right, and you can access it here. And I guess I need to change the order of those lines in order to get the other things to show up. Yeah, that's so weird. Okay. Yeah, so I've been expanding that. In addition to the API documentation, I'm going to try to get sort of the setup tutorial stuff in text format, maybe with some screenshots, and get that up on a page that will be linked in the main web page. So yeah, that's part of the short term roadmap goal is the more documentation. That's probably the biggest part of it. More examples, right? So I'm hoping to for Global Game Jam make a game uh, with my younger brother, and hopefully we'll release that and have it available to play on Jam Launch. And yeah, and then also probably in the next few months I'll get to these other things. So more session data metrics, right? So eventually, if it ended up making more sense for Jam Launch or for the people using Jam Launch to be charging by the actual usage, there would need to be data about how much data was going in and out of each game session, how long each game session was up anyways. And sort of a lot of the stuff is almost there to be doing that. So I'll probably start adding that just for the benefit of the users, but then eventually that might also help support an alternative, possibly more sustainable way of charging for the resources. And then also, I think these are sort of low hanging fruit, but I don't know. I just keep getting distracted by some of the bigger things. But having more multiplayer modes, so like matchmaking, or having it so you can just quickly invite friends instead of having to share the join codes. And then features like leaderboards. So there's like the ways you can save the data um, uh, in in the game database, right? So you could technically implement the leaderboard in the game itself, but it might be nice to have like something you go to in the browser. Same thing with like tournaments, having it so that you could just kind of have a matchmaking style setup where you could have like an event that people could join, and then sort of go through the different levels, and if they win, then they move on to the next round or whatever. So having a couple things like that might be cool. Um, and it would be nice if it was kind of just taken care of for you, like you didn't have to figure out your own way of doing it within, uh, like just via the database on your own, right? There'd be sort of like a template on how to do that. So yeah, so hopefully that's going to be coming soon too. I mean, and obviously all of these things, if you're a subscriber and you really need something sooner rather than later, I try to prioritize that kind of stuff too. So there may also be things too, depending on you know what um, what subscribers are asking for. I might throw something else in the short term roadmap, depending on what people need. Um, so so yeah, but that's sort of the idea here. And like the other thing too. So I was trying to put together sort of the roadmap. I wanted to have like more tangible things, right, rather than just like improve stability, right? But I think really the big thing here is I'm going to be trying to iterate on it. I'm going to be trying to make it better, and I think part of making it better is maybe not having a completely preconceived notion of what better would be, right? I think I've already learned a lot from what some people are trying to do with it. Sometimes like my mindset on what it could be doing is not like as enlightened as it could be, compared to people who have more experience with, video game stuff, um, or some other multiplayer collaboration idea, right? Um, so yeah, the goal for 2024 is to basically iterate, try to make it better, try to make sure it's sustainable, try to make sure it'll be able to stick around, try to make sure it'll meet the needs of the people who subscribe, and uh, and then have a much much better idea of what's going on by the time 2025 rolls around, right? So it's definitely early days, right? So there's not a ton of super super concrete things happening, right? I mean, I think this is pretty pretty clear. There's not too many things that could go awry, right? But yeah, it's going to be. This is definitely sort of like the you know, early adoption period where, um, I'm going to figure out how to achieve this like ultimate vision of having it be a sustainable platform that just is a go-to default solution for Godot multiplayer. Yeah, and so with that, I think I should probably wrap it up. If you have any other questions, feel free to reach out in the Discord. Um, if you have, I think there were a couple points where, it was probably confusing, or left the door open to possibilities. If you have ideas of like, maybe something I'm missing that could make this, a better idea or a better product, right? I'm all ears, right? I'm like I said, I have ideas. I want this to work for my use case. I want it to work for the current customers' use cases. Um, and I'm determined to make that keep happening. But if there's things that you think I'm missing about how to make something like this work, I'm definitely flexible. I'm definitely interested in hearing what you have to say. So reach out, yeah, join the Discord, try to play the example game. Try to see how many people can join the example game before it breaks or something, right? Or contribute pull requests to the examples if you know better ways of doing multiplayer stuff or yeah, um, it'd be great to hear from you. Thank you. uh, yeah, I think I'll leave it at that, and I'll try to do one of these updates every other month, maybe every month. We'll see. Uh, yeah, because I want to make sure people understand, where I'm at, where things are going, what I think is the state of things, so that you know, it's like you can be more comfortable engaging with this platform or with this community if you know sort of where I'm coming from. So I want to try to just make it very clear where I'm coming from, and that's sort of the purpose of these longer devlog videos. So, anyways, I'll see you at the next one. Thanks.